Hey, it's Giselle. I'm back with another video, and here I'm just going to show you how to set up the optimizer and just walk you through just the deck creation process. Or I shouldn't say the deck creation. You'll always end up creating a deck at the end of the day, but at least you can optimize it some capacity. So I've already had the file open and everything, but if you download the file, make sure you download it from my website as VBA code and Excel spreadsheets, macro enabled spreadsheets such as this. Generally come with a few warnings before you open it up. Make sure you have a virus scanner. Scan it if you're getting it from someone else other than me or my website, just to be safe. And after you do that, you just want to open it up and go to options here, and you just want to go to add-ins, click go, and you want to make sure solvers is enabled, as once again this is linear programming, so for this type of math you need solver. And then after that you just want to hit the alt key and F11, and it'll bring up the VBA panel here, and you just want to go to tools, references, and then you want to click solver and make sure that's enabled. From there you are good to go. And I do have a few safeguards in here. So for whatever cards you play, whatever cards you put into this tool here on the side, you want to make sure that you have enough copies of disruptive cards, and you can define disruption whatever you like. You can make Regeki a disruption card, or Dark Hole. I don't consider those cards to be disruptive. Uh, I consider cards that can be activated on either player's turn to be disruptive, and just need 10 copies of any cards, any grouping of cards there. And to do so, you have two options here. It's either yes or blank or anything else for no. And then the next thing, the optimizer will say no to whatever you're doing if you have too many cards that are bricky. Once again, you can define what a brick card is for a guide or a reference for me. Brick cards are cards that are limited in how many times can be used on the first turn. And in the case of, say, tribute summon monsters or monsters that require discarding, or it requires something to function, it can't just inherently function on its own, then those cards are bricky. So I just mark that as a yes. And the other option is kinda, and I consider kinda bricky cards as it can be activated once per turn. So that could be spell cards, or something else, such as normal summon. So monsters that are below level 5, you only can normal summon it once, and that's it, unless you activated a spell card such as double summon or something, or chain summon, where you can get additional normal summons. Then those cards are kinda bricky. So those are the two options there, and there is a distinct difference between them. So if you mark a bunch of cards as kinda, don't fret it. But if you do have a lot of yeses where you know you just can't play it, then it's just going to tell you no. And finally, we have priority, and it has nothing to do with the old rulings or anything of that sort, where certain cards had priority. No, that has nothing to do with that. So priority here is what cards you want in your opening hand, and you can discern the highest priority as a lock. In this case, the optimizer will ignore everything in regards to how it calculates card advantage or net advantage for you, and also just disregard everything. It's just going to lock it in place. And if you lock in too many cards, then the optimizer will look at other factors such as how brick the card is it disruptive, and finally net card advantage. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Usually it will try to stop around 18 cards, 18 copies of a card if you have, say, 3 times 6, so around 6 cards. So that's pretty much your opening hand, 6 cards. So you probably want to just hang around, just capping yourself at 6 locks, and you should be good to go in terms of what you want your opening hand to look like. And in most cases, that's 3 copies of 1 card. Um, I don't want to try and do the math there, but I think if you run 3 copies of a card, there's a 30% chance of drawing it on the first turn. Times 6, the probability kind of grows down if you're trying to get a hand of all 6. That's like almost 0%, but at least you'll get at least one copy and so on. And maybe I'll do a video showing the math on that as well. But moving on, we have cards to activate, or cost to activate, pardon me, and then advantage. So cost to activate, for example, let's just look at a tribute summon monster such as Blue Eyes White Dragon. If we're tribute summoning that card, then that is a hard -2. You're tributing 2 monsters on the field, and you don't really count that card that you're summoning, the Blue Eyes White Dragon, as a plus in return. Like it's not a 2-for-1. It's just 2 since you already had Blue Eyes White Dragon in your hand. So that is a -2. And in most cases, I do like to add a 1 to that, and that's because so in the case of Blue Eyes White Dragon, for example, it'll be a -2 and then a +1, and I like to put a +1 there because Blue Eyes White Dragon is such a beater. It's such a huge monster that it's almost guaranteed that your opponent is going to try to commit resources to either remove that card from the field or bounce it back to your hand or something else. I guess it's all the same. So usually they'll play something like Bottomless or Solemn Warning, and that's a 1 for your -2. Or they might just exceed summon it. That they'll just completely abort what their original game plan was to immediately try to remove that problem card. So they'll at least commit 1 card to whatever you put on the board. So that's what I like to do. But in the case of a Blue Eyes White Dragon, I'm not even trying to summon the card from my hand, so it'll always just be a 0/0. It'll just be in there. It's a catalyst for something else. So, but that's another story. It's all up to you at the end of the day. So it'll always calculate in this portion or this column here. And sometimes, since this is a macro-based sheet, for whatever reason, sometimes it may not calculate here. Don't sweat it. The tool will still calculate things fine. But if you just want to see what it is, you can always just hit the F9 key. I'll jump back to that later. And then finally, we have card limit. And these are how many copies the optimizer will try to run maximum. Won't go any higher than this. And you can adjust this based on the ban list or how many copies you actually have on hand, or you just don't want too many of a specific card on top of the locks and whatnot. You can change here. You can always do that as well. And just to jump back here, I don't think I ran through the different levels here in terms of what you can do in terms of priority. So we have lock. That's 3 copies. Yes is anywhere from 1 to 3 copies if it has enough space, and if the card is really good enough in terms of advantage, and if it's not bricky. And then we have meh, which is if it's in the deck, cool. If it's not in the deck, whatever. In this case, this is I would say for me in my case, when it comes to using this tool, if I get a deck and I have some meh cards in there, then it's something's not right. Like, to me, a deck should always be trying to work towards the end game. And if I have 1 or 2 copies of a mech card in there, sweet, that's fine. I have like 3 copies, then I have some room to add something that can improve the win condition or the end game. So that's one thing to keep in mind there. And then finally, if you just leave it blank, then the tool will just ignore it. It will try to ignore it at all costs. It's not guaranteed. It's similar to a meh. So if you get cards that are blank, or if you have no here for something else to mark it as like an X, then if you get too many of those cards, then you might want to reevaluate how you're calculating card advantage, or if the cards are too bricky or if they're not disruptive enough. That's very important to get what you want.